back to Volume 3 of The Adventures of Susan MeeLing, Scuba Diver Extraordinaire, chapters 10 through 20. So I'm going to go over some more specifics because though I gave the quick little abbreviated version in certain regards, let's see. So when looking at my scuba diving depth gauge, which was purchased at International Scuba, it was purchased used, but it was a British depth gauge computer, which also had navigation compass in it, as well as it also measured the oxygen level in my tank at the PSI. And so it was a 3-in-1 I had purchased. And it measured in ATMs, or atmospheric measurements. So there was a scratch on it because the person who had sold it to International Scuba had moved to the United States of America from England, and at least that's what I was told. And so it was a British setup in that regard. So I purchased it, and I mean, realistically, I think I paid, it was either $1,000 or just under $1,000, or just over $1,000 for the 3-in-1. And it had one scratch, and that was it. So in that point, and that's why, you know, in reference to scuba diving, in certain portions of class, it is taught in atmospheric measurements, which is 33 meters for one atmospheric measurement. Yet there are other portions in which you're taught in feet. And so I can't be the only person who has issues with that sort of conversion. And so bringing that into consideration is an important factor. Because despite the reality of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 and the after effects of, I cannot be the only person when scuba diving, it is automatically whatever you were taught in from youth. So being born in the United States of America, I was taught in feet measurements or inches, and whatnot like that. Whereas overseas, they're taught in meters and centimeters. Well, centimeters, it has the word meter in it. But nonetheless, the metric system essentially. And so when any scuba diver from the United States of America goes scuba diving, they're automatically going off of what they're taught. And so that's essentially part of the concerns that I've had over the years when it came to scuba diving safety. And while I understand that, you know, scuba diving is per individual, it's still an overall safety concern. I mean, even when in cavern diving, which I'll get to in another portion of Volume 3, you're taught, at least I was, in feet. And so you're only able to go so many feet down and so many feet in, and for cavern. And so the aspects of regulations in a more encompassing way where it's understood in an overall, so that, you know, if somebody is paired with, you know, if they go overseas to go scuba diving, you know, they're paired with someone who all across the proverbial map, that they would be able to understand one another either way. And so it's something that I've brought up before, but nobody really listened to me then. So continuing on in reference to my depth gauge, My scuba dive watch was in feet, whereas my depth gauge computer was in atmospheric measurements. And so, whatchamacallit, I did miswrite it or type it for the book where it's 33 feet, and you can see even just in that where there's that sort of an issue. So in reference to seeing 9s all across I also did wear my prescription scuba mask. And so I acknowledge I had my contacts in while scuba diving. So where I thought I saw 2 9s, hypothetically, it could have been far more 9s. But in that reference, 999 ATMs would be a total of 32,967 feet, or 10,999 meters. When I was in the ocean and realizing towards the end of November of 2018, which was 9 years after my scuba dive at the Vandenberg, I had realized I had seen 9 separate 9s. So while I did the arithmetic for 9,999,999 ATMs for the book, realistically, most likely it was 999,999,999 ATMs because it maxed out. But for the math or arithmetic in reference to the 9,999,999 atmospheric measurements, that it equals to 329,999,967 feet, or 109,999,989 meters. As some might have as much of an issue accepting those numbers as realistic for the depth of the ocean I was at, despite the realistic aspect of the pictures I took, and it does prove, there are several points that are of importance to take into consideration. Though the information on the internet says the top of the tower is no more than 115 feet from the surface of the ocean, obviously that is inaccurate and impossible for a multitude of reasons. Though I had wanted to go to MAST, or Marine and Science Technology School, with a mandatory naval academy when I was in New Jersey in the 1990s, and though I looked at joining the United States of America's Marine Corps branch, and though I had been to the Great Lakes as a teenager, I had not ever been on a naval vessel for a military regulated ship before or ever. Well, afterwards I went to the Lexington, but that was different. And it was a different ship, but it gives an example. So the important aspects of which the Vandenberg is a naval aircraft carrier, which had the capability of holding several tanks along with the ammunition, and in the Nimitz class. So for those who are near the Bremerton shipyard, you know what size, as far as height and length, the Vandenberg is. And it also has the satellite for communication. And while I I comprehend in the past and even in current times, for certain aspects, that naval measurements for the various ships are usually kept within a classification level to prevent other countries from knowing that information. However, at this point in time, um, in my opinion, should work together. So I'm going to show you a real quick picture. And out in Arco, Idaho, there is a portion of the Hawkbill, and that is a submarine that was used back in the day. So this is the Hawkbill. That is my son. A submarine is obviously smaller than a naval aircraft carrier. So my son at that time is in the picture is my height of 5'4". And that is just the hull of the submarine. Again, a Navy ship that is an aircraft carrier is much taller and wider than that. So for that, as an example, for those who may not necessarily be able to go out to a naval shipyard, such as in Bremerton, Washington, or has not ever been on a naval ship such as the Lexington, or there's also the USS or USNS New Jersey in the New Jersey area or the East Coast region. So here's another picture of my son. This is in 2016. Again, that's my son. And that's the hull just of the submarine. That is not the size of the full submarine, and definitely is not the size of the Navy ship that is the Vandenberg that I was, at the Flora. So, and survived, obviously, because, I'm breathing. Today is let me make sure, it is the 3rd of April, 2020, and my scuba dive was back in, August of 2009. So, I'm still breathing, obviously. That's obvious. So, the aspects in regards to the depth level of obviously being far greater than 115 feet from the surface of the ocean to the top of the tower of the Vandenberg, those who understand and comprehend when planning to sink a ship for creating an artificial reef, there is the points which you have to take into consideration of the upcoming 25 years of the power for the downward draught of not just submarines, but also of cruise ships and naval ships. Like every one of them, the most powerful of them all for the next 25 years from the point of when actually dropping the ship down. And the downward draught is when it's the water pressure in a downward motion. So there has to be that space between the top of the ocean for when a cruise ship goes by for however many tonnage weight at a diagonal angle. Then you have to take into consideration submarines that would obviously be going between the top of the ocean, or the top of the ocean waters, through the topmost point of the tower, and that downward draught at an angle, but because it's closer to the, in this case, the Vandenberg, it would have to be even further down, and at minimum a multiplication of 3. Then you also take into consideration for the equation of the cruise ship for, the most powerful of the next 25 years, at minimum, if there are plans for further out, then they have that in consideration as well for that downward draught in a combined mixture of the cruise ship overhead at the top of the surface with the downward draught, the submarine with the downward draught, but in a one going over the other, and that mixture of the downward draught when the tail end of the cruise ship and the tail end of the submarine going at over one another, and the combined downward draught, not forgetting at different angles. So it's not just one way, like one over the other, but it's also at crisscrossing, so that way there is the biggest amount of safety for that. And so with that combined downward drop motion of the currents combined in that calculation, you also have to consider that it at minimum is times 3, sometimes times 5, depending on what the natural current system is for that particular location in the oceanic waters. So while there might be some who might not have ever understood or believed, or however you want to put it, despite my pictures, that is a consideration in regards to those who did not have something to do with the planning, but for their understanding, or at least knowledge of. And so, while I do not know what the average downward draught is for the current or the next 25, maybe even up to 50 years, or even further, depending on what plans are essentially for submarine ships as well as cruise ship liners, but there is that consideration to ensure the safety of each cruise passenger, naval, sailor, marine, and coastie, as well as submariner. So, and since another point to take into consideration is the Earth is made up of 75 to 80% water. And I have said this many times over, and there have been some individuals who have refused to believe me when I said we know more about our galaxy than we do about the oceanic waters. And I said that before my head injury. I said that back in New Jersey. And so while there were some individuals who very much acknowledged that is absolutely true, there were plenty of those that said, no, we know, no. Because there are areas, such as an abyss, that there is no genuine understanding of. And then, whatchamacallit, let's see, also, and again, while there are plenty of people who claimed and falsely so, claimed that they thought I was lying, and it's like, I can't lie. It's just impossible. I can't. I might get the numbers wrong because of that, but it's not lying. That's just my issues with cognitive and going from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math. So, not forgetting the pictures aspect that I obviously took, and they're not doctored. They're not photoshopped. They're not altered in any way. I didn't know how to do that back then. The filters that are, like the Instagram stuff, and I didn't know how to do that. I knew how to invert a picture. I do know that. I knew how to invert, but I didn't know how to do any of the other stuff. And so, while there are plenty of individuals who have the understanding of the depth levels in certain regards, there are others who do not, and just because you do not have the understanding, knowledge, or any comprehension, that's not changing the reality. That's not changing the facts. And in reference to my scuba dive gear that was on the U-Haul truck that got confiscated around the Austin region, and then the stuff sold in a lot, there was an individual who said that she was being a good Samaritan and told the scuba shop guy that she was being a good Samaritan, but she didn't want anybody to know who she was, but she was being a good Samaritan, and made sure to tell the scuba diving shop guy that she was being a good Samaritan, describing me, including tattoos that that guy had not seen in person because I wear jeans usually when out, and so my tattoos on my legs are covered. So to describe my tattoos on my legs to the scuba diving shop guy before describing my hair kinda is a tell, not necessarily a, as that female had claimed, wrongly and falsely. And then to say that she knew that I would want the pictures. Kind of, I mean, not denying I wanted the pictures, but at the same time, the description of what I look like. I mean, I don't normally wear, when out, clothing that shows my ocean tattoo, but she described my ocean tattoo to that scuba dive shop, which my son was taking junior SEAL classes at, which means I definitely would not have been dressed in such a manner, especially with the way I am. So, yeah, somebody had purposefully caused that to occur, and then I didn't wind up getting the information for me to get my stuff from the U-Haul company. From that lot, there is a, I would guesstimate, a, what is it, an inventory of what was actually on there, or in there, and that would include my white manta ray fins, my Farmer John scuba suit, which is was a two-piece, long sleeve, long pants, but separate, and my regulator, two separate sets. And the cavern setup was not what I went to the Vandenberg with. It was my regular scuba setup because I hadn't taken my cavern diving classes yet. And so it was a 3-foot hose and not a 9-foot hose, which I will get into that in the next video in reference to other stuff. However, if hypothetically somebody attempted to take credit for something that wasn't theirs to take credit for, then they would have turned in a 9-foot hose with a necklace instead of the 3-foot hose and an octopus regulator setup. And there should have been 2 different BCDs and a regulator that was still brand new in the box. Just as a small aspect of that ability to prove. But then again, if anything occurred because, let's say, somebody sold the gear instead and just decided to make a quick buck or whatever, well, yes, you are responsible for that death, because it would be if that individual went into any location with that gear that was not a lake, and it had to be a very shallow lake, because if it was a lake like Lake Travis, what would come out? And that's not forgetting the aspects of if it was in, because of not just the aspects of my DNA in the regulator as well as the hose, but because breathing, my saliva, the fact that my essence essentially would be in that gear. And so what would essentially come out, so let's say, because it was set up for cavern regulations, somebody went cavern diving with that gear, I would guesstimate they did not make it out alive. Not forgetting the fact that it was in atmospheric measurements and not in feet measurements. So somebody would go much deeper than they were trained for and would not be able to handle. Not forgetting a few other aspects. Returning to the points I had referred to in Volume 2 with my scuba instructor Brian Devine and the Sunto computer certification, as well as referring to the aspects of the Reiki and that laptop that caught on fire. Just as a hypothetical. Oh, and apparently my neighbors over there are not a fan of the fact that during quarantine I'm just keeping myself entertained and doing my best to do and be better in comparison.